The act of smiling can be a beautiful expression of joy, warmth, and connection. But when it's forced, when it becomes a reflex rather than a genuine gesture, it loses its authenticity. It becomes a mask, a tool to appease, to avoid conflict, or to gain approval. Behind the inauthentic smile lies a quiet tension, a sense of unease, as though the person wearing it is saying, "Don't look too closely, don't ask too much of me." This kind of smiling is not about sharing happiness, but about deflecting attention, smoothing over discomfort, and keeping the peace. It's a shield meant to protect the wearer from the vulnerability of being real. Yet, paradoxically, it disconnects them from others, creating a barrier that prevents true understanding and intimacy. Over time, the habit of inauthentic smiling can become exhausting. It requires constant self-monitoring, suppressing emotions that don't align with the pleasant image being projected. The smile becomes a performance, and the performer loses touch with their own feelings. In trying so hard to be what others want, they risk forgetting who they really are. Contradictory choices arise when actions and words don't align with inner feelings and desires. It's the internal conflict of wanting one thing but doing another, driven by the fear of disapproval or the need to maintain harmony. Saying yes when the heart screams no becomes a way of life, an attempt to keep others happy at the cost of personal truth. This dissonance often stems from a deep-seated belief that one's worth is tied to being agreeable, to avoiding friction at all costs. The individual feels torn, pulled in opposing directions, one path leading to their authentic self and the other toward the expectations of others. But time and again they choose the latter, sacrificing their needs to avoid discomfort. Each time a contradictory choice is made, a small piece of authenticity is chipped away. The person learns to ignore their own voice, suppress their instincts, and numb their desires. Over time, this can lead to resentment, frustration, or even a sense of being lost, unsure of who they truly are or what they genuinely want. And yet the pattern persists. The allure of approval, the comfort of not rocking the boat, it feels safer, easier. But beneath the surface, there's a quiet yearning for alignment, for choices that reflect one's true self. The weight of these contradictions grows heavier, serving as a reminder that peace cannot be found by always choosing to please others. Over-polished behavior is the result of carefully curating one's actions and words to be as agreeable and non-confrontational as possible. It's the art of refining oneself to fit into every situation, smoothing out any rough edges that might provoke criticism or discomfort. On the surface, this kind of behavior seems admirable, polite, considerate, even charming. But underneath it often hides a deep fear of being seen as imperfect or unacceptable. Every action is calculated, every word measured. The over-polished individual goes out of their way to anticipate the needs and desires of others, often at the expense of their own authenticity. They nod when they don't agree, laugh at jokes they don't find funny, and avoid expressing opinions that might cause disagreement. The goal is always to maintain a pleasant image, to be the kind of person no one could possibly dislike. But this relentless self-editing comes at a cost. It requires constant vigilance, a hyper-awareness of how others perceive them. They are like actors on a stage, endlessly performing, never stepping out of character. And while this performance may win approval, it also creates a sense of emptiness. The person others adore is not the real them, but a carefully constructed persona. Over time, this behavior can feel stifling. The over-polished individual may start to feel like a stranger to themselves, unsure of where their true self ends and their performance begins. They might long for the freedom to speak, act, and live without worrying about how it will be received. Yet the fear of rejection keeps them trapped, polishing their behavior even more, hoping that someday they'll finally be good enough to be loved for who they are. Hidden truth lies beneath the surface of every person who wears the mask of constant niceness. It is the unspoken reality of thoughts, feelings, and desires that remain tucked away, out of sight, for fear they might disrupt the carefully crafted image of agreeableness. This truth isn't erased, it's simply concealed, buried under layers of polite smiles, hesitant nods, and words chosen to maintain the peace. What often drives this concealment is fear of judgment, rejection, or conflict. The individual learns to hide their authentic self, believing that exposing it would make them unworthy of love or respect. Instead of voicing their true thoughts or standing firm in their needs, they suppress them, creating an internal reservoir of unexpressed emotions and unmet desires. This suppression doesn't come without consequences. The hidden truth begins to weigh heavily, creating a sense of disconnection not just from others but from oneself. The person may feel restless, frustrated, or even resentful, though they often struggle to identify why. They are caught in a silent battle between the need for authenticity and the perceived safety of staying hidden. Over time, this concealment can erode their sense of self. The gap between who they are and who they pretend to be grows wider, leaving them feeling isolated and misunderstood. Yet the hidden truth remains, quietly urging them to break free, to take the risk of being seen for who they truly are. It is not an easy task, but the freedom that comes from living authentically is worth every moment of discomfort and vulnerability it requires. To be imprisoned by expectations is to live your life according to the rules, standards, and desires of others, rather than your own. It is a state of being where your actions, thoughts, and even feelings are dictated by what you believe others want from you, or what society tells you is acceptable. The desire to meet these expectations becomes a cage, restricting movement and growth, and locking you into a narrow version of yourself. In the beginning, these expectations might seem like helpful guidelines, a way to navigate the complexities of social life and relationships. However, over time, they start to take on a life of their own. The pressure to conform builds up as every action, every word is measured against an invisible standard. You find yourself asking, will they approve of this? Will they like me? Will I be accepted if I do this? This constant evaluation leads to a life lived in reaction to others, not in response to your own desires or values. You become like a chameleon, changing colors to fit in with every new situation, constantly adapting, always seeking external validation. And while this may make you appear adaptable, the cost is significant. The more you tailor yourself to the expectations of others, the less you feel like the person you truly are. Being imprisoned by expectations leads to a subtle but persistent disconnect between your inner world and your outer actions. You may find yourself feeling restless or discontented, like something is missing, but you can't quite put your finger on it. It's as though you're living a life that isn't entirely yours, as though you're following a script written by others instead of improvising your own. Over time, this constant striving to meet external expectations can lead to burnout or frustration. The energy spent trying to please, to be what others expect, drains you, leaving little room for self-discovery or personal growth. The fear of stepping outside those boundaries can be paralyzing as you worry about the consequences of not meeting those expectations: disapproval, rejection, loneliness. But the more you stay within the prison of expectations, the harder it becomes to break free. The key to unlocking the cage lies in embracing the uncertainty of being true to yourself, letting go of the need for approval, and daring to express your true desires and values. Only when you let go of the need to meet others' expectations can you begin to build a life that truly reflects who you are. The fear of disapproval is a subtle yet powerful force that governs many of our actions, often more than we realize. It's a quiet, lingering anxiety that whispers in the background, influencing decisions, shaping behaviors, and dictating the way we present ourselves to the world. It operates on the belief that our worth is determined by how others perceive us, and the mere thought of being rejected, criticized, or misunderstood sends a ripple of discomfort through our entire being. This fear can take root early in life, shaped by experiences where approval was given as a form of affection or acceptance, and disapproval equated to isolation or judgment. Over time, the desire to avoid disapproval becomes ingrained, a learned response that guides how we interact with others and how we choose to behave. It becomes so pervasive that we start to prioritize external validation over our own inner sense of truth, molding ourselves to fit the expectations of those around us. The fear of disapproval can lead to a constant internal conflict. On one hand, there is a deep yearning to be authentic, to express our true thoughts, feelings, and desires. But on the other hand, there is the nagging fear that doing so might provoke rejection or cause others to see us as flawed, unworthy, or inadequate. This fear often results in people hiding parts of themselves, adjusting their opinions, or holding back their desires in an effort to avoid any form of criticism. It's easy to see how this fear traps us in a cycle of self-doubt. The more we seek approval, the more we feed the very anxiety we fear, because approval is never fully guaranteed. People are unpredictable, their opinions shifting with circumstances, moods, and personal biases. So no matter how hard we try to conform, there's always the possibility of disapproval, and this uncertainty fuels even more fear. This fear can also create a paradoxical effect. The more we bend to others' expectations, the more we lose touch with ourselves. We begin to wear masks, present versions of ourselves that we think will be accepted, and put on performances to appease others. But in doing so, we neglect our own needs and desires, constantly shifting to fit someone else's mold. In time, this can lead to feelings of frustration, emptiness, and even resentment, as the true self is buried beneath layers of people-pleasing behavior. The fear of disapproval, though deeply ingrained, is not a permanent sentence. It can be unraveled with awareness and courage. By acknowledging that disapproval is not a reflection of our worth, but rather an inevitable part of human interaction, we begin to loosen its grip. True freedom comes not in the avoidance of disapproval, but in the willingness to face it, to express our authentic selves, even when it may not be universally accepted. In doing so, we create space for real connection, not based on the illusion of perfection, but on the raw truth of who we are. The shrinking self is the quiet erosion of your true essence over time, a slow diminishing of who you really are in favor of who you think you should be. It happens gradually, often without conscious awareness, as you begin to compromise your desires, beliefs, and authenticity in the name of pleasing others or avoiding discomfort. Every small sacrifice, whether it's hiding your opinions, ignoring your needs, or suppressing your emotions, acts like a brick in a wall, slowly encasing the person you truly are, until you no longer recognize the reflection in the mirror. At first, these compromises seem insignificant, perhaps even necessary. You tell yourself that it's just easier to go along with what others want, that you're being kind or considerate by putting yourself last. But over time, the accumulation of these small concessions chips away at your sense of self. The more you silence your inner voice, the quieter it becomes, until eventually you struggle to hear it at all. You begin to lose touch with what makes you unique, what excites you, what frustrates you, or what brings you joy. This shrinking of the self is fueled by fear, the fear of rejection, judgment, or simply not being enough. When you start to shape your behavior around the expectations of others, your life becomes a series of reactions rather than authentic expressions. You learn to be what others want you to be, not what you were born to be. The more you shrink, the more you feel disconnected, as though you're playing a role in a play that you didn't write, and the audience is a reflection of who you think you need to be rather than who you actually are. Eventually, this shrinking self leads to a sense of emptiness. You may find yourself feeling lost, unsure of who you are or what you want, constantly seeking external validation but never truly feeling seen. There's an internal friction that starts to build because, at the core of it, the real you is still there, yearning to be expressed. The quiet frustration, the internal stirrings, the restlessness, it's all a sign that the shrinking self is in direct conflict with your true essence. What's more, as your self shrinks, so does your capacity for genuine connection. Relationships, whether personal or professional, are often built on shared authenticity. When you begin to hide who you are, you pull back from others, unable to fully connect. You may be surrounded by people, but you feel alone because the person they are engaging with isn't the real you. This can breed isolation, not because of a lack of people, but because there's no space for the real self to be known and appreciated. The shrinking self, however, is not permanent. It is not an irreversible process, though it may feel like it at times. The first step in reclaiming your full self is acknowledging how much of you has been suppressed and asking, what parts of me have I ignored? What parts of me am I afraid to express? Only by confronting these fears and allowing yourself to be vulnerable can you begin to expand again. When you stop shrinking to meet the expectations of others and start living according to your own truths, you reclaim the power and freedom to exist fully, without apology or self-censorship. A lack of genuine connection is the silent isolation that persists even when surrounded by people. It's the feeling that despite the conversations, the shared moments, and the outwardly pleasant interactions, something deeper is missing. There's a gap, a distance that can't be bridged by small talk or polite smiles. It's the absence of true intimacy where two people are not just present physically, but also emotionally, mentally, and spiritually aligned. This void often stems from the masks we wear, the personas we project in order to be liked, accepted, or approved. We put on these facades, offering only the parts of ourselves that we believe will be most palatable to others. The result is that, while we may engage in numerous exchanges, we never really see each other. We remain behind the walls of our masks, hiding the vulnerabilities, desires, and authentic selves that could foster deeper, more meaningful bonds. The lack of genuine connection creates a paradox. We may crave closeness, yet we're unwilling to expose the parts of ourselves that would allow for it. We become afraid that if we reveal too much, we'll be rejected, judged, or misunderstood. This fear drives us to remain on the surface, to stay within the bounds of politeness and socially acceptable behavior, never venturing into the messy, raw, and imperfect territory that true intimacy requires. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that proximity equals connection. That simply being in the same room or having regular conversations means we know one another. But without vulnerability, without the willingness to show our true selves' imperfections, and all what we're left with is a series of superficial encounters that don't nourish the soul. In these exchanges, people often remain strangers to each other, even though they share space and time. This lack of depth can lead to a sense of loneliness, not because there's no one around, but because we're not seen for who we truly are. The more we hide our true selves, the less we allow others to truly see us. And in turn, the less capable we are of seeing others in their full complexity. Real connection requires a willingness to let go of the masks and to embrace the discomfort of being truly known. Over time, this absence of connection can cause a sense of disillusionment. We might begin to question the value of our relationships or wonder why we feel so disconnected despite being constantly surrounded by others. We yearn for something deeper, something more real, but we don't know how to reach it. The barrier is not the world or the people around us, it's the reluctance to expose the parts of ourselves that are messy, unrefined, and vulnerable. To cultivate genuine connection, we must first be willing to show up as ourselves without pretense. We must allow ourselves to be imperfect, to be seen in our full humanity. It's in that vulnerability, in the willingness to step outside the comfort zone of politeness and avoidance, that true connection can blossom. When we stop hiding, when we let others in, not just the parts of us we think they'll approve of, but all of us, we create the space for real intimacy and connection to thrive. In the end, the pursuit of niceness, the constant efforts to meet others' expectations and avoid disapproval, comes at the cost of your own authenticity. By shrinking yourself, by hiding your true feelings behind inauthentic smiles and contradictory choices, you lose touch with who you truly are. In doing so, you build barriers to real connection, leaving yourself isolated even in the presence of others. But this doesn't have to be your reality. The key to freedom lies in letting go of the mask, in embracing your true self, imperfections, desires, and all. Only when you stop performing and begin living honestly will you experience the genuine connection, peace, and fulfillment that come from being truly known and understood. It's not an easy path, but it is the only one that leads to a life that's truly yours.